All right. Got my coffee. Got text from the zany, or fax from the zany professor. Got my dog. And I have been waiting to talk about this. I've been studying it. It's out of my comfort zone. Um, and I'm not going to pressure myself over the amount of time it takes. And I don't even know if it's worth watching this whole thing. But what I am trying to do is take what is a complex conversation and really try to make it palatable for anyone. So that's going to take a little bit of effort. Okay. So I'm looking at the facts the zany professor sent me, and I'm going to try to go over a few of these things so that you'll understand the Blackmore Peterson debate. Um, it's not that it's impossible to understand, but for me personally, it was kind of out of my wheelhouse. And I kept seeing it, I kept framing the argument a certain way. So I had to watch it like 5 times because I kept asking the question, what does this have to do with God? And what does this have to do with religion and informing culture and all that? And it just turns out that there was just a lot of baggage that these two brought. Apparently, they had a lot to discuss beyond the subject at hand. But that's not to say the subject wasn't addressed. It absolutely was. Uh, there's no question that it was dealt with. I want to start out from the beginning, saying that I think Justin Briley is a superb moderator. And I am not being remotely facetious about this. I think this guy's really good. He was born to do this. He is just excellent at not only knowing when to drive the conversation a certain way. He's very polite but direct about cutting off people who are rambling. Um, he knows when the conversation is getting dull and kind of can turn it into something more interesting. He also kind of knows when to challenge. I've seen this where, and I've talked about it in the past, where he'll challenge one of the participants if the other participant isn't doing that. And I'm just, the more and more I watch him, and I've been watching him for years, but I want to just say that I really think he's good. And if you don't watch his show, Unbelievable, you should. It's really good. He does a great job. Um, they're not all winners, and Justin Bradley isn't on game all the time, but generally speaking, he does an unbelievable job. He did great. Picking a winner in this debate between Blackmore and Jordan Peterson, Susan Blackmore, I believe, and Jordan Peterson, is tough. It's not easy. She challenged him on something. He really never answered her. She didn't let him go on it, but she wasn't able to get an answer. A good debater will demand an answer and will point out that they weren't given one. And I felt she kept using the word slithering when she talked about Peterson talking about things. And I had to say, he laughed about it, but she was right. She was right. He does slither his way out of directly dealing with things. It's a great debate tactic. It works, and it worked on her, even though she was aware of it. Kind of interesting. Um, but she didn't get blown out by any stretch of the imagination. She held her own. Neither of them did a good job diffusing or verifying or even attempting to verify whether religion is needed for fulfillment in life, which is for an enriched life. It's not exactly the language being used there, but you get the point. So, in order to actually understand the conversation they were having, I have to do, like I said, I have to go out of my comfort zone. And so I had to do some research. So, I had to research this issue between archetypes, the Carl Jung archetypes, and the Richard Dawkins meme theory. All right. Um, Archetypes are essentially this sort of unseen, really unquantifiable, but seems to be evidence for um, ideas that are rooted very deep in human history. So deep that it's somewhere, it's how it's informed. Carl Jung himself said he wasn't sure. Jordan Peterson, one time when talking to William Lane Craig, speculated that it could be Platonic or it could be from God. He wasn't sure. But that's after Craig had called him out on the genetic fallacy, and he slithered his way out of it. Peterson did. But he did say the same thing Carl Jung said, which was Carl Jung was very direct about it. He said it was impossible to know what informs the archetypes. But the archetypes are basically, we act them out in our lives and they rise up out of our subconscious and sort of into the world in different ways. They manifest themselves in different ways. So one of his archetypes was like the mother figure, right? The trickster was another one, the warrior. And these are things that sort of, in their cross-cultural. He did go to different countries to see if he could find these archetypes. Again, there's probably some confirmation bias because you get to a point where things become kind of tautological. And what I mean by that is a thing sort of at some point just sort of, and you could make the argument that they're even circular, I could say maybe. But, and I would say another thing too, philosophy has done a better job dealing with this than psychology. They're trying. Peterson makes at one point in the debate tries to make the case that whatever archetypes ultimately select is actually correct. That was my little rhyme there, not his. Read some Thomas Aquinas. I think he does a much better job dealing with these things linguistically. Very interesting. Anyway, point here is that archetype seems to be very deeply rooted. And again, it's sort of a priori, and that is to say it's before you're even born. It's going to be part of your genetic code. It's not as absurd as it might sound. You might say, well, that sounds ridiculous. Not really. Is it anti-biblical or anti-Christian or anti-monotheism? No, not really. It's totally compatible with what we believe. Might even be completely legitimate. I'm not sure. I'm not fully versed on this. Like I said, it's out of my comfort zone. But I hope that this makes it a little easier for anyone to understand. Then you have Dawkins, who in 1975 I believe it was 75, published The Selfish Gene. Now, this was an attempt to describe the rise of culture through imitation. Okay. So memes are a form of imitation. Now, at that time, Dawkins he said that genes were a form of carrier, and I suppose he means an information carrier, and that memes were another type of carrier. Now, Susan Blackmore did a very poor job. I need to defend her on this. She didn't have time. Okay, it's a big, weighty subject that could not be fully, exhumed in this conversation. So I'm going to correct myself on that. It's not that she did a poor job. It's that she was unable to elucidate the idea that is the meme gene relationship sort of a parallel reality, or does one inform the other? Now, Dawkins, many years ago, said that they're analogical, okay? That you can look at genes and see how they inform biology, and you can look at memes and see how they inform culture. Okay, now, Peterson argues that archetypes precede memes, and that memes are a cheap imitation. And at first, this really came off to me and as sort of my kung fu is better than your kung fu. But I kind of know what he's saying. He's saying that, and others are saying this too, that it's apparent that Dawkins really never read any Carl Jung. and probably should have. And that would have probably given him either a second thought about the whole meme issue or would have enhanced his perspective on it. I'm not sure. But Jordan Peterson really felt like, I think this comes out of the fact that he doesn't respect Dawkins. I mean, it was clear he does not respect the New Atheists. But, and by the way, just to be honest, for good reason. He says the same thing I said the first time I ever heard him, which is they're lightweights. And even Susan Blackmore had to say that there's a superficiality in their writing. They just, in the big grand scheme of the big heavy hitters of thought, they're lightweights. And I think Peterson sees the unfortunate nature that they're popularizers, which there's nothing wrong with that. But unfortunately, they're, I've seen this on the tram at work. Someone's reading a Daniel Dennett book, so everybody can see the title. They have it up, so or they're reading, what was the Dawkins book, The God Delusion? He had that up. This guy had it up so everybody could see what he was reading. I was like, a delusion. Anyway, so funny. But Peterson just really had issues with Dawkins memes. He just felt they were a very, very weak take on archetype. Now, Blackmore came to Dawkins' defense and said, that he wasn't respecting memes enough. Of course, she's written books on memology and all this or whatever. And essentially was saying, look, this is how we understand. This was an attempt to understand how imitation leads to culture, the rise and evolution of culture. And then, of course, they started going into a couple other things. But I would say this, go to the 1350 mark in the debate, and you'll see where she talks about the evolution of culture. That's the timestamp. And then that's where you can kind of question. It's a good section to watch on, is she saying this is a parallel reality or not? Then it's actually, and by the way, that's a sort of a chicken or egg question, isn't it? And in philosophy, that's what I love about philosophy. Philosophy can make what appears to be simple and show you the complexities that you've just sort of assumed and didn't challenge. And philosophy can take the things that appear complicated and simplify them. This question is a chicken or egg question. Archetype nor meme can answer the question. Now, if you read Romans 1, he says the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all, right? And what he's saying here is that nature reveals something beyond it. So we as Christians we have the answer for what lies beyond these questions. These questions do not push you through the veil. If you're going to study archetypes, you're going to study meme theory and all this, they're not going to push you through the veil. Blackmore did a very little reductionist two-step. She talked about genes, but then and talked about the process that gives rise to life, according to, which is a very dubious for naturalists, is a very dubious process that they're leaning into here. But she talked about that briefly, but in the end, she knows you can't answer ultimate questions with this. Now, what would Dawkins say? We know what Dawkins would say. He would say, we're working on it. Now, one of my critiques of this whole thing is that I think that it possibly falls, and I could be mistaken here, okay? But I think it possibly falls under the category of that it explains too much. And what I mean is, if you're going to say that genes or memes and archetypes can explain, because Jordan Peterson is saying that archetypes determine what is correct once these things are selected in the evolutionary process. That would mean that nothing's arbitrary, no matter how arbitrary it would appear. It would mean that was selected, therefore it's correct. But how could nothing be arbitrary? And what I mean by explains too much is even nonsense would have to be selected as correct, according to what Peterson's saying. And we know there are things that are nonsense. Just read some Dawkins. I'm joking. But this is something that I think Peterson, if you asked him about it, I think he would slither out of it, to be honest with you. And by the way, this meme issue isn't much better. It's this idea that you can explain everything with memes or explain everything with archetype, but those things themselves have to fall under that rubric, right? They have to also be explained by these realities. Now Blackmore said that archetype preceded meme. So she has a little bit of an out there. She could say, well, no, archetype could explain meme. You don't need memes for archetypes. But then that begs the question. I'm sorry, it doesn't beg the question. That's circular reasoning. It does force us to ask, we'll say that. It does force us to ask, how much do archetypes actually explain? If they're not appealing, if they can't explain to things beyond themselves, how do we know that they have the explanatory power that Peterson himself is? And Blackmore would not go with him. She did not agree. She did not go as far as the claims that he was making. She says that explicitly. So I have to pin this on Peterson because it's just like, I think that you're saying that archetypes can even explain themselves to a degree if you're saying that what's chosen is correct. I'm avoiding a little bit of talking about the evolutionary process that's in the mix of all this because that's kind of the next part. Now, this is where they began discussing meme-gene co-interaction. Now, real quick, I'm going to do an imitation of the zany professor. This is not the zany professor. This is me imitating him since he's not here, okay? All right, you ready? Here we go. Got to look at his notes here because this is from him, not me. All right, here we go. All right. Meme gene co-interaction. Don't you mean meme gene Okerlund? All right. So, what's going on here is the idea that memes inform culture, right? But maybe memes inform the genes, and the genes. So they're starting to kind of flesh out this idea that memes have some effect on evolution. Do a little bit of research on that. You will see the word pseudoscience. That doesn't make it pseudoscience, okay? But you'll see that word come up a lot. And the reason why you'll see that come up a lot is there is absolutely no evidence for this at all. The first thing is this. When we talk about evolution, we need to be very, very careful in how far we go with something like this. You know, it's one thing to say humans evolve. We can see that, right? I mean, we know it's not absurd to think that a human being would evolve to some degree. It would explain the differences in races and all that. Whatever, it's fine. So is that evolution? Sure. But I mean, the word evolution among the Christian community gets a bad rap sometimes because we think evolution is an explanation for creation. And that is not necessarily the case. Okay? That's absolutely not necessarily the case. We don't have to accept all tenets of evolution. And I would say this. You better come with some serious evidence that this meme gene co-interaction is something to take serious. There needs to be real evidence. None was provided. I'm thinking none will be provided. Finally, into the debate. This is where Blackmore lost. This is where she lost the debate. And lost big. When I say she put up a good fight. She did, but she had one section that she just got destroyed on. I want to say this. If you were debating someone and they bring up statistics, buddy, I'm not going to believe anything you tell me unless you can show me your work. What statistics are you talking about? Because it's so easy for people to just make up statistics. So the statistics she brought up was that in states that call themselves more religious, they're doing worse than in states that are less religious. How's that? How's that? And Peterson said, well, if you look at the United States, it's doing better than third world countries. And it's prospering. And she's like, oh, and she starts shifting the data. She starts shifting the emphasis of the data. Incarceration rates, incarceration rates. That is a very arbitrary thing to say. And higher incarceration rates could be a good thing. And what is she defining as more prosperous? Is she saying a person has better income because they get an abortion? That's not more prosperous. That's less prosperous, right? But you can see these are hasty generalizations. So to go straight there, I think was the minute she did it, I think she thought it strengthened her position. The second she started bringing out statistics with no citing nothing, just saying it broadly, I knew her goose was cooked. Done. You're done. You can't win this debate now. And he hammered her. He just basically says, he didn't even have to ask a lot of questions. It was like, we'll just look at the U.S. versus. And it was just sort of like all of a sudden she started shifting the standards of what made, what counted as prosperity. All of a sudden it wasn't being prosperous. But again, if you're not talking about material prosperity, what are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about incarceration rates. Incarceration rates. It's such a okay. Well, I went to Disney World the other day and it was really nice. So there's no Disney World anywhere else. You know, that's as good as the one in the United States. You just come on. This is not. It's so disingenuous, and that's one of the things about the new atheists that we're all seeing, and they don't realize we see it. You're disingenuous. You are. We see it. You're not fooling anyone. And Peterson sees it too. And this is why we just don't take them that serious. It's hard for me to take them serious. Again, it's like the Sam Harris thing with expecting the Bible to predict electronics. It's such a shallow perspective. Anyway, apologize for the length, but I will say this. This will be a tough one to grade in terms of whether people will enjoy. It's an A+ debate if you really like these sort of psychoanalytic, Carl Jung type, dealing with archetypes and memes. If this sounds interesting to you at all, you're going to love this. I enjoyed it. Like I said, it was out of my comfort zone. It was something new to think about and explore mentally. So I really liked it. In that regard, I'd say take the time to actually watch it if you like that kind of thing. If you're not into that, this one is a skip. It's a pass. Even if you like Jordan Peterson, it's a pass because this one is really very nuanced. It's about archetype versus meme for almost the entire debate. They leave it at one point, and Justin Browley tries to leave it behind, and it comes right back because they had an axe to grind there. So, again, hopefully this is helpful, and see you next time.